Christina Ho said that culture is the underlying foundation of how we think, behave, and react. What is culture? Culture is the collection of beliefs, customs, traditions, behaviors, values, and artifacts that characterize a group of people or society. We have a culture as a nation, we have a culture as a state, we have a culture as a county, we have a culture as a city, we have a culture as a church, you have a culture of your family, you even have a culture of your own individual self. Culture shapes how individuals interact with one another, whether they realize it or not. How they perceive the world, it is affecting you right now. And how they express themselves. Culture is passed down through generations, and it evolves over time. How does culture impact our lives? Culture impacts nearly every aspect of your daily life, shaping your thoughts, behaviors, interactions, and even the way we perceive the world. I'll give you some examples of how culture has shaped you and is shaping you, like communication and language. There are ways we speak, words we use, and even our body language is influenced by culture. There's a way our young people speak that us old folk don't speak. Matter of fact, we don't even know what they're saying anymore, right? And your parents didn't know what you were saying when you were saying it at their age, right? Culture affects what you wore today. Culture affects how you interacted and communicated out in the commons. Culture affects social norms and behavior. It defines what is considered acceptable or unacceptable in society. For example, bowing in Japan versus handshakes in the U.S. Those aren't preferences, those are culture, communication, and behavior. Beliefs and decision-making are impacted by culture. Religious and philosophical beliefs rooted in culture affect views on marriage, gender roles, and ethics. A lot of what we believe about certain things, even within Christianity, is not always based, and most of the time isn't based on the Word of God. It's not based on the life of Jesus. It's based on culture. Culture is saturating you to believe and think. It produces entitlement. It produces social norms, right? Culture produces you walking into church today expecting a cup of warm coffee. Just think about it. If you walked in and there was no coffee out there, your reaction would show how much you are affected by culture, right? In what ways did early Christians create culture? You see, if you go back to early after Jesus' resurrection, the followers of Jesus, they weren't impacted by culture as much as they were affecting and changing culture. It's one of the primary reasons Jesus saves us and puts us in relationship with him, is not to be driven by cultural norms. Early Christians didn't just inherit their culture, although they did, they were a part of it. They actively shaped it. They weren't just countercultural, which we'll talk about today, which we should be if you are truly a follower of Jesus. If you are a church attender, that's a different thing. But if you are truly an apprentice of Jesus, you should live a countercultural lifestyle. But they didn't just live countercultural, they impacted and actively shaped the culture around them. They did that through their ethics, through art, through literature, through social structures. They laid the foundation for much of Western civilization, and I'll give you some examples of it. The 7-day week with a rest day on Sunday, what we are in right now, became widely adopted in Christian societies. You are here today because of a culture-shaping movement that happened 2,000 plus years ago. You are sitting in this room because culture was being shaped by Christians. Christianity introduced egalitarian ideas, teaching that all people, regardless of social status, were equal before God. That was not the cultural norm. But Christians showed up and said, man, we are all created. No matter your skin tone, no matter your language, No matter where you came from, no matter your social status, we were all created by a creator, and therefore we should have equality. We're still fighting that today. Early Christians emphasized compassion, humility, charity, contrasting with the honor-based values of Roman society. It's a historical fact. They promoted the idea of universal human dignity, leading to early welfare efforts like helping the poor, widows, and orphans. It is known throughout Rome that Christians, one of the greatest ways they expressed their faith in Jesus, one of the greatest ways they countered the culture, one of the greatest ways they became culture creators is they would go out and pick up the orphans and discarded children in Rome and bring them into their home. Not because of a subsidy check the government would send them, but because they saw children who needed love, and Jesus was their rabbi. And so they did what their rabbi did. They went and rescued those who no one else would rescue. And Rome watched it and changed its total ecosystem because of it. Christian teachings on love and forgiveness influenced the social norms, moving away from vengeance-based justice systems. Charles Colson said this about the church and culture: redeeming culture is the never-ending mission of the church. It doesn't mean we're doing it, but it is our never-ending mission. It's why Jesus came and sent his disciples to preach not just a gospel about death, burial, and resurrection. He came and preached a kingdom message. They were supposed to be preaching the good news of a kingdom, the changing and redeeming of culture. Pope John Paul II, who would disagree with me on some major doctrinal issues, did say this, and I agree: the church counters the culture of death with the culture of love. And I would say a little different: the church is supposed to counter the culture of death with the culture of love. But we are failing. We are in the largest decline of Christianity in the history of the world. We are in the largest decline of movement away from God in the history of the world. We are not winning. We are losing. Culture is thriving. Culture is educating our children. Culture is forming our children. It's forming our marriages. It's forming how we live every day life. And so what we find in John chapter 2 that Annette read so beautifully, we find Jesus enters Jerusalem, and we see a collision of culture and kingdom. Culture has made its way into the Jewish temple. Culture was no longer outside in Jerusalem with those who didn't believe in a living God. It had made its way inside the Jewish temple. It had made its way into the Jewish faith. It had made its way into so many of the Jewish traditions. And so Jesus does what he does best. He reminds us that we all, if you are a follower, an apprentice of Jesus, that we all are called to live a kingdom lifestyle. A kingdom lifestyle, not a cultural lifestyle. But the first thing he says in John chapter 2, verse 13, is he points us to these Jewish traditions, these spiritual traditions, these things that we still keep today in so many ways. And he says, here is what you were supposed to do. You were supposed to live a kingdom lifestyle. People are supposed to look at your life and not see more of the same. They were supposed to see a kingdom come. And he says in John chapter 2, verse 13, the Passover of the Jews was at hand, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. The reason Jesus went up to Jerusalem is because Jesus lived a kingdom lifestyle, and it was time to go celebrate the Passover. So what is the Passover? I want to make sure we understand what the Passover is, because what you're going to be able to see is that we still have many things in our spirituality, in our Christianity, in our apprenticeship that are supposed to show people what a kingdom lifestyle looks like. Because going to church does not, in and of itself, show people a kingdom lifestyle. You know why? Because they're not in the room. Man, if they saw how much I love Jesus, they can't see it in here, right? And so we're supposed to have things that were part of our kingdom lifestyle. And Passover was one of those for the Jews. Passover is a Jewish holiday that commemorates God's deliverance of the Israelites from slavery in Egypt. It took place in the book of Exodus. You can read about it there in Exodus, and you'll see why they celebrate that holiday. And Passover 2025 this year is going to happen on sundown of April 12th, and it ends on nightfall of Sunday, April 20th, the same exact day that we celebrate Easter here. It doesn't always correlate with that because it goes to their calendar. It lasts for 7 days. It's a 7-day celebration. If you're in Israel, it's 8 days if you're outside of Israel. And one of the places that captures why the Jews still celebrate Passover today is Exodus chapter 12, verse 14. It says, "This day of Passover shall be for you a memorial day, and you shall keep it as a feast of the Lord. Throughout your generations, as a statute forever, you shall keep it as a feast." And so he told what I did in Passover when I brought you out of Egypt, when I passed over your house, when the death angel passed over you because of the blood of a spotless lamb on your doorpost. I want you never to forget when I saved you from death and brought you out of your slavery in Egypt. And I want you to remember it every single year so that your children and your children's children and the people around you will look and say, what is that commemoration all about? Let me tell you about when Jesus saved our life. It was to point culture to a kingdom lifestyle. See, Passover wasn't just a reminder. It wasn't just a holiday, and it wasn't just a festival. Passover set the Israelites apart from the rest of culture. Passover was unique to them. Passover was a testimony of the relationship between them and Yahweh. Passover, like so many parts of our Christianity today, if we got back to them, if we practiced them, if we made space for them, was intended to show people who don't know God, what a kingdom lifestyle looked like. See, here is how apprentices of Jesus are supposed to live. Romans chapter 12, verse 2 says, "Do not be conformed to this world." Do not be conformed to this culture. And to deny that it's happening is ignorance, and it's not bliss. If you think the culture, if you think the name of our faith, if you think the world is not trying to make you like it, then you are blind. Yeah. Culture is constantly, consistently, and daily trying to conform you to this world. It's trying to make you like everybody else so that your God is irrelevant. If the world can look at your life and see its life, then guess what? They don't need your God. He says, do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed. Be transformed. Like a caterpillar into a butterfly. Be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that by testing you may discern what is the will of God, what is good, acceptable, and perfect. Deuteronomy chapter 14 says, "For you are a people holy to the Lord your God, and the Lord has chosen you to be a people for his treasured possession out of all the peoples who were on the face of the earth." We are supposed to be his people. A treasured possession. Being transformed from what we were before Jesus to in his likeness. Not just on Sunday morning, but in every aspect of your life. And we'll get to more of that. We have Christian traditions that display a kingdom lifestyle. And I want you to just take an account of, do I do these Christian traditions? Do I do these things that show other people that I'm living a kingdom lifestyle? We talk about one all the time. It's called the Sabbath. How does practicing Sabbath, a 24-hour period to stop, rest, delight, and worship, show culture that I'm living countercultural? See, culture takes a day off. Your neighbor takes a day off. Your coworkers take a day off. They do their lawn, they do their errands, they take a nap, they go play with their kids, they go to baseball games. Everybody you know eventually takes a day off. So if you just take a day off, you're no different than culture. But a Sabbath was a set apart 24 hours where you stop, rest, delight, and worship, and it is completely set apart to God. You don't work. You don't think about work. You don't check into work. You detach from this culture and the world, and you say, this is God's and nobody else's. You feast. You make love. You stop. You do nothing that would take life from you. Man, can you come with us? I'm going to run to the grocery store. No, this is my Sabbath. Hey, can you take this work call real quick? I cannot. This is my Sabbath. Well, I know you're off today. It's just one call. No, I'm not off today. I'm stopping because God can do it without me. I'm resting because my soul is in tune with Him. I'm delighting in being who I am and nothing more. I am worshiping and giving Him everything I have for 24 hours. Right? I'm doing it with my family. I'm doing it with my kids. Sabbath is a kingdom lifestyle activity that points our culture to a richer life. Man, Sabbath is so hard. You don't understand. I have little kids. Being countercultural is always hard. It's always hard. None of these are going to be easy. Nothing about this whole sermon's going to be easy. I don't like it at all. But it's the passage we're in, so we got to do it, right? So if you get cut up by God today or you get convicted with God today, I've been sitting in all week. It's awful. Welcome to Richwoods. Right? Leviticus 23, verse 3 says, 6 days shall work be done. God even says you don't have to just keep a 5-day work week. You can do 6. Right? We've gotten culturally used to 5. But the 7th day is a Sabbath of solemn rest, a holy convocation. You shall do no work. It is a Sabbath to the Lord in all your dwelling places. How about another tradition that we practice or should? Generosity. Ruh-roh. Do you know that Jesus' followers' generosity should be one of the most light-shining things that the world sees as different about us? That we don't just give, we don't just reluctantly give to the church and to other people and to the poor. We don't just give of our time to those. We don't just serving kids out of this deep weight of somebody's got to do it. We give generously because God gave all, and it's all His anyway, right? It was the heartbeat behind the tithe. We don't preach the tithe here very much, but 10% of your giving set apart to the Lord, to His church. I give it to Him, but He has access to 100%, right? So that the world can see, right? Culture decides how to use and make the most of their resources, all of their resources. Most of the church handles their money just like culture. I see the giving. I know how many giving units we have. I know that 80% of our church in this room does not give to this local church. It's a fact. We handle our money, 100% of it, just like the culture. We do not hold it open-handed to God to use for His kingdom. Jesus' followers set a part of a percentage to the Lord by giving to the storehouse of the local church. Jesus' followers also give over and above their tithe to organizations that do work in Jesus' name. See, the early Christians, they weren't worried about giving 10%. They were so generous, particularly in Rome when the early church got started, that they were figuring out, how do I give 100 and live off nothing? 2 Corinthians chapter 9, Paul is writing to the Corinthian church talking about the heart of being generous. He says, the point is this: whoever sows sparingly will also reap sparingly. Whoever sows bountifully will also reap bountifully. You know what that's the belief in? It's the belief that God can do more with my 90% I have left than the 100% I keep selfishly for myself. But that takes faith. Each one of us must give as he's decided in his heart, right? Giving isn't a church leadership issue. Giving is a personal issue between you and your God. If you came up to me after the service and said, man, I want to be generous because that's what Kingdom Lifestyle does. How much should I give? You need to spend time with God. You figure that number out with Him. Start somewhere. And let him lead you to where he wants you to go. Because he says, don't do it reluctantly or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver. Our generosity points to a kingdom lifestyle. The secret place. We talk about that a little bit here, right? The secret place points to a kingdom lifestyle. Culture points people to meditation, yoga, mindfulness, and breathing techniques. There's nothing wrong with some of those. I do some, right? I tried yoga a few weeks ago. That was fun. You ever seen a guy my size at my age with my lack of flexibility do yoga? It ain't pretty, right? I did it in my basement by myself, no cameras, right? But culture points to mindfulness. Culture points to centering yourself. Culture points to sounding your truth. Culture points to slowing down and breathing and soaking in nature. So if you do those things, that's just like everybody else. And that isn't what God called us to when it comes to the secret place. Jesus' followers are invited, don't miss this, to dwell in the shadow of the Almighty and seek his presence and power. That is the secret place. Psalm 91:1, he who dwells in the shelter of the Most High will abide in the shadow of the Almighty. What's the invitation you have tomorrow morning to get up and spend time with the God of the universe? It's not just to center yourselves. It is to get in his presence and say, man, I want to abide in your shadow. Speak to me, commune with me, love me, remind me who I am. I'm going to give my best back to you. I'm going to give my body to you. I'm going to be conformed to your image. Now let's go hit this day. How's your morning? Oh, I spent it in the shadow of the Almighty. Imagine if that was your answer at work. And it wouldn't be a radical answer. It actually should be our Christian norm. I dwell in the shadow of the Almighty. Our community and connection. Culture celebrates self. My favorite shoe company. Just do it. Just do it. But don't just do it. Climb over whoever you have to in order to make your dreams come true. Climb over them. We do this in the church too. Right? That's what I love about my staff. We get together at 7 a.m. every Sunday morning to pray together, and my staff prays for the other churches in town. Because if they win, kingdom wins. Right? Instead of like, man, can you believe what that church, the stance they took on that? Can you believe what they do over there? Oh, that worship sucks. Oh, that preacher, he's not Chad. Well, duh. We're not trampling on their churches. We don't trample on our neighbors to get ahead. Jesus followers live in community. We seek unity. We recognize that we are actually stronger together. Jesus followers know that the kingdom is best served when we outdo one another in showing honor, when we exalt others above ourselves, when we serve others rather than use them for our gain. Here's the point. When we keep spiritual practices, we reveal a kingdom lifestyle to the world. You actually are countering culture through action and showing the world a better way to live. Jesus wasn't joking in John 10 when he said, I came to give you abundant life. It's not a house with a white picket fence and perfect, beautiful kids. It is a kingdom lifestyle that lives for something that lasts forever. Right? Now, we just don't bring a kingdom lifestyle in our surrounding culture. What we also see from this little story is we also can invite the culture to a kingdom location. I love this. 3 words in this next passage. John chapter 2, verse 14. In the temple. We have lost how impactful the temple, the church, was supposed to be in our community. We've lost it. We've lost it. The history and purpose of the temple is this. I'll give you the history of the Jewish temple. Not all of it. It would take days. But the Jewish temple was the central place of worship, sacrifice, and God's presence among his people. Here's what the Jewish temple did. It served as God's dwelling place. It was a physical location where God's presence resided. You know where that is now? You. You are the walking temple of God. And you take that temple everywhere you go. And when people look at your lifestyle, which we just talked about, they should see the God of the universe, right? We are the temple, but God still has a dwelling place. When we all get together, we all bring the presence of God here, and he dwells here. The temple was a place of sacrifice. The priest offered sacrifices to atone for the people's sin in Leviticus 16:30. It's a center for Jewish worship and festivals. Key celebrations like the Passover and Yom Kippur were observed at the temple. It's a symbol of Israel's covenant with God. The temple was a symbol representing God's promises and the Israelites' obedience, okay? Now, don't miss this. Here's the history and the purpose of the church. It's supposed to be like the temple. It's another way we can be countercultural. Our culture uses Sundays for selfishness, football, hobbies, and sleeping in. Christians pretty much do the same. I'll be there unless. I'll be at church Sunday unless it's been a busy week at work. I'll be at church Sunday unless the Bears are playing on this coast. London game. It never makes sense to me. The Bears suck. Why would you miss anything for the Bears? But whatever, that's a whole side story. I can't get it. If you root for the Eagles or somebody good, I get it, right? I won't be at church for 10 weeks because of this hobby. We've bought fully into culture because we've lowered the value of the gathering of the temples of God. Because this has just become singing songs, listen to some guy or a woman run their yap, and move about my day. Culture has permeated the local church. Sunday used to be God's day. You know it is owned by the NFL. Right? Jesus followers gather together. Why? For worship, for apprenticeship under Jesus, for communion with one another and God, for family time with your children, for encouragement of one another, because living countercultural Monday through Saturday is exhausting, and I need to come be built up. Well, we don't live on mission all week. We don't need Sunday so much. That's why they gather together. That's why in China, they'll go 3 hours by bus to get to the underground church, because they are trying to win the world for Jesus Monday through Saturday, and they're exhausted pouring out, and they need to get around other people who believe what they believe and be lifted up for another week of kingdom lifestyle. We don't need Sunday because Monday and Saturday is easy. It's easy when you're swimming with the current. It's exhausting when you're swimming against it. There's a time for service and joy. What do we call that? Worship, apprenticeship, communion, family time, encouragement, service, and joy. We call this the church. At least what he hoped she would be. 1 Thessalonians 5:11 says, therefore, encourage one another and build one another up just as you are doing. Thessalonians was like the model church. He said, man, keep doing that. Hebrews chapter 10, verse 25 tells us, don't neglect meeting together, as is the habit of some, but encourage one another, and all the more as you see the day drawing near. Acts 2:42, they started the church by devoting themselves to the apostles' teaching, the fellowship, the breaking of bread, and the prayers. In Colossians 3:16, he's writing to the church at Colossae, and he says, let the word of Christ dwell in you richly, teaching and admonishing one another in wisdom, singing psalms and hymns and spiritual songs with thankfulness in your hearts to God. Richwood's Christian Church has similarities with the temple. It's supposed to. This is what it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be a dwelling place of God. And it is every time you walk in. Every time you walk in. It's supposed to be a place of sacrifice. Financial service, a living sacrifice of ourselves. It's why we invite you to the altar. It's why we invite you to prayer. It's an opportunity not to just pray for grandma's toe pain. It is an opportunity to come and offer yourselves to God and say, use me this week. It's why we spent $30,000 on a prayer room, so that you could come during the week and offer yourselves to God so that we could be the church He designed us to be. Richwood should be a center for worship and key celebrations like Easter, Christmas, baptisms, and weekly communion. Richwood's Christian Church should be a symbol of our covenant with God. We gather because we were made family by God Himself. Check this out. Every week, we all have an opportunity to invite others to a kingdom location. I love this phrase. A pastor that I know in Atlanta, it's the first one I've heard use it. He says, I want all of you to be a bringer. We're trying to be bringers. We want to bring people to the kingdom location. Because if you go to church, you become a Christian? No. Because this is where I can expose people to the presence of God and His people, and they can find out you will never experience a community like this. And when you bring your neighbors, family, and friends to a kingdom location, you should expect, and I think you should demand, to discover a place that has a kingdom focus. You should, as members of the church, demand that we have a kingdom focus as a church. It's what Jesus demanded when He walked in the temple. Why did Jesus get so frustrated? Because the temple had lost its kingdom focus. Check it out in Acts chapter 2, verse 14. In the temple, can you imagine you're in the temple, you're selling things, and you're not supposed to be in there, and Jesus, the God of the universe, walks in? Woo, woo. Right? Right? It's like your boss walks in and sees you playing Minecraft on the computer. You in trouble, right? In the temple, He found those who were selling oxen and sheep and pigeons, and the money changers sitting there and making a whip of cords, right? Throw out your blonde-haired, blue-eyed Jesus with lambs and children on His lap. He got a whip of cords, right? He drove them all out of the temple with the sheep and the oxen. I don't know what they did, but He's like, get out. And He poured out the coins of the money changers, and He overturned their tables, right? And He told those who sold the pigeons, take these things away. Do not make my Father's house a house of trade. His disciples remember what was written. Zeal for your house will consume me. We have lost zeal for the church. We've lost kingdom focus. We've allowed money changers to come in. We have allowed consumers to sit. Just take and give nothing. In the name of how many can I gather and can I have a mega church? And if we get over 1,000, we're considered a mega church. Yeah. What we see inside the Temple of Jerusalem is what happens when culture inhabits the church rather than the church impacting the culture. Tom Rainier said this, a church without a gospel-centered purpose is no longer a church at all. This is what I fear, man, is that in our gathering, God would ever look at us and say, you're not even a church. You've lost your way. And if I was there, I'd have a whip of cords. I remember reading somewhere, somebody said, man, if God could see, if He saw the state of the American church, we'd be getting a letter. We'd be getting a letter. The church doesn't exist. And please hear all this in love. Please hear this in love. The church doesn't exist to reach a certain attendance number. The church doesn't exist to sell books, podcasts, or gain social media followers. The church doesn't exist to serve coffee, donuts, and keep your kids happy. She doesn't. The blood of God did not purchase her so that we could have great warm coffee, donuts, and keep your kids happy so you can have an hour and a half free of your life. The church doesn't exist to play songs we like, to do talks that make us feel good, and to help us have friends. And I can't tell you how many texts or emails I've gotten in my career that says, man, how many times we're going to play that song? When are we going to play these songs I like? Man, you preached too long. You preached too short. Man, you said this. I don't like it. And I'm like, I didn't write it. It was Malachi. I've been blamed for God's writing more times than I can count. But it's because, the church is here to serve me because they need my attendance, they need my money, and they need my volunteerism. It is modern day money changers, merchants inside the church. We are consuming instead of gathering in his name. So what does the church exist for? To help people find and follow Jesus. To worship and serve God and be in awe of him. To be a house of prayer. To equip, challenge, edify, and build up the body of Christ. To help the poor, the marginalized, and fight for justice. To be a center of hope, sacrifice, and an emergency room for the broken. Recently, someone reached out anonymously, of course, because it's always anonymous. Critiques are always anonymous. Do you know these people are in your church and what they've done? Sounds like the Pharisees with Jesus. Do you know who he's sitting at dinner with? Oh, we know, and we are so glad they are broken in here. Right? Because that's why the church exists. Right? If you are sitting and you see someone across the room who you're like, dang, they are broken, they're a sinner. I think, do you know what they did last night? I'm like, what is the church for? And we help them. The church exists to glorify God. It's why we're doing something called Gather 25. You know what Gather 25 is? We invite you to this. It's going to happen February 28th. It's a 25-hour worldwide prayer gathering. Yeah. Marty's excited. With the world. Why? Why would we do this event? Well, it falls in line with our mission, vision, values. It's really a good thing. It's low cost. It's put on by somebody else, so it's easy work. You don't get it. We're being a part of that because that's what the church should do. We should pray. He said make the church a house of prayer, and so we're going to make it a house of prayer. And we're going to join with God's people around the world to pray for 25 hours straight, here, at home, in our communities, everywhere we go. Allow me to close with this one thought. Culture is actively trying to make you, your family, and your church something other than what God has called it to be. It is actively doing it. I'll tell you how active culture is. I'll tell you how active our enemy is. He's working right now to try and make it where you don't hear a darn thing I just said. He's giving you excuses why you haven't lived a kingdom lifestyle. He's giving me reasons why our church isn't kingdom focused. And that's what I would do. Right? Culture is at work to make us something other than what God has called us to be. The kingdom and culture are at odds with one another. And it is a constant battle for your attention, time, resources, and passion. Ralph Waldo Emerson said this: to be yourself in a world that is constantly trying to make you something else is the greatest accomplishment. It is so much harder to be a child of God than we acknowledge it is. It's why Paul told us to fight. It's why he told us to pray. It's why he told us to gather. It's why God birthed this thing called the church, because his anticipation was living countercultural all week. They're going to need each other. They're going to need one another. Instead, we are asking questions like, do you have to go to church to be a Christian? It's the wrong question. If you are truly an apprentice of Jesus, you'll be starving for the gathering. You'll be starving for your brothers and sisters. You'll be starving to come hear a word of God prepared for you so you can go back out and help people find and follow Jesus. Jesus said this way in Matthew 6, but seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness. Because let's be honest, what is more worthy of our seeking than the kingdom and presence of God? What is more worthy? The NFL's not worthy. My hobby's not worthy. My snooze button isn't worthy. It's not worthy. Whatever I could buy with the money I could give to God, it's not worthy. It's not worthy of me. I've been redeemed by the blood of Christ. His blood purchased his church. And what Jesus does when he walks in the temple is he says, man, it is time to live a kingdom lifestyle. Choose kingdom over culture. So there's only one way we should close this morning, and that is lifting his name up, that he is worthy, that who else is worthy? And so that's how we're going to finish, declaring who else is worthy. Maybe before this morning, you've been giving all these other things to culture. That's okay. Be done with it. Be done with it. You're not worthy of me anymore. You are. Let's flip the script on this dying church culture and become alive in Christ Jesus. Let's stand and worship.